later on, as we arrived in Southeast Asia area, we found out it was urination. You know, war is hell, as they say. And for most of us who have been there, we've been there and back. And as you look at us today, we are living elements that has survived the worst conditions on the face of the earth. And we have been prepared to kill. That's no way of getting around it. And it's not a very easy task. It's an awful task. And some of us have survived everything that our government taught us or prepared us to do and sent us to do. And you see us nowadays, we look good to a certain degree. But within us, or within our own individual selves, we're like walking graveyards. A lot of our comrades who went through these experiences in war, no matter whether it was in Vietnam, Korea, or wherever, you know, it's something that doesn't sit well with us. Some of us can live with it and continue on to be productive citizens, and some of us just can't handle it because our mind and our total mental makeup and physical makeup just will not allow us to be normal citizens again. But as you can see, most of us have survived, and we're proud of it. When I was growing up as a teenager in Oklahoma, I was always a robust type person. I could go out in the jungle or the woods. I could kill things and I could survive. I had my own .22 rifle that I just prouded so much, you know, and I can stop a rabbit or duck or anything in its track at a minute distance away. So I learned to be an expert marksman. And I never realized just how much all of these little things that I had put into my total makeup would one day come back and sort of either haunt me or make me into something that maybe I didn't want to be. So when I joined the military, there was nothing for me to be a good marksman with a rifle or any type of weapon. And to be an air commando, that's a pretty tough job. And I know most of you probably saw the movie with Stallone as the air commando. Well, our conditions, you know, I don't know if George can attest to this, but our conditions just wasn't that movie type. You know what I'm saying? That's a movie. And things are a little different when you know you don't have cameras over your head that's shooting every move, you know, and you have to fight for everything. Well, I was trained in air commando tactics in Kansas after being selected by the president. And we go through prisoner of war training and everything as to how to survive. I've even been trained to recycle all of my waste. I can recycle my whole body. And I was just looking at a story the other day where they caught this guy in North Carolina that blew up all the places here in the East Coast, like in the Olympics and so forth. You know, he survived, they say, for 5 years. But even his method of survival versus the survival that we've had is totally different. Survival for your life, running from life is one thing. But when you have to survive in order to try to get life, it's a totally different. So I've been trained as an assassin. And I don't know if you noticed on the war with the Iraq War, when those soldiers go to combat, and anytime we go into combat, we have everything we need. We have scientists, we have doctors, we have lawyers, you know, we have everything we need. So I've prided myself on the accomplishments that I have done for the United States and have survived it all. And I just appreciate being back here and looking at all your young faces, because I know I was once there. So I'm going to close right now and let George have an introduction part, and then we'll be entertaining questions to get us started.
Palermo. I currently work as a project engineer for Northrop Grumman Corporation on the B2 program. I've been with Northrop going on 30 years, and kind of think I've become a productive citizen, even in spite of the experiences that I had in Vietnam. My experience in Vietnam was totally different than Coach Love's. Each person that went there, even if they were in the same unit at the same time, experienced different things at different times in different ways. And each of us are a result of what we experienced and what we remember. These are some pictures I'll pass around of myself in Vietnam, some of the different things that I did while I was over there. And this picture is of myself and a friend in Vietnam in 1998. When we went back on a mission. So you can go ahead and pass those around while I'm talking. If I was the type of person that embarrassed people very easily, I would tell you that my daughter's sitting right over there. But I'm not that type of person. So, in any case, grew up a relatively normal lifestyle. Born in Chicago, raised until I was 12 years old in Chicago. Moved to California in 1959, went through junior high and high school here in California in 1966. I'd like to say I graduated from high school, but I'm convinced that I was thrown out of high school. My grade point average for the 4 years that I was in high school was about 1.7, so I was not a big scholar. And in 66, when I graduated, there weren't a lot of colleges that were beating down my door to get me to come, and I had pretty well had it with school, so I didn't want to go on to college even if I'd been able to. And like Coach Love, Uncle Sam was breathing down my back, just waiting there with my greetings letter telling me I was going to be drafted into the military. So I thought, well, I'm going to take a jump on these guys, and I'm going to enlist in the military so I can get everything that I want, and I don't have to worry about what they stick me with. So I looked at my options, and basically there's 5 military branches that you look at, and I thought, now which one would I probably fit best in and want to go in the most? And my dad was in the Army, served in World War II, and I looked at the Army and I thought, now those guys are pretty much ground pounders. They're pretty much shot up most of the time. And besides, they're known as dog faces, and with my looks, I didn't need any extra help for that. So I said, no, I'm not going to go into the Army. Air Force, well, you got to have a pretty good education to be in the Air Force, you know, pilots and flying and so. I don't want to go to school, don't want to have anything to do with aircraft because I don't like them. So I'm not going into the Air Force. Then I looked at the Marine Corps and I thought, those guys are really brain dead. First to fight, first to die. Don't want any part of that. I'm not going into the Marines. Forget that. Looked at the Coast Guard. I said, yeah, that sounds pretty cool. You know, boats. You know. Yeah, maybe the Coast Guard. Well, I found out I didn't meet the height requirement. Oh. No, really. Did you know you had to be 6'2" to join the Coast Guard?
Oh my God.
Yeah, because if your ship sinks, then you can walk to shore. So I said, okay, I can't go in the Coast Guard. I'll go in the Navy. That's where I'm going to go. Same ships, and, you know, nice and clean. Yeah, I'll be in the Navy. So I went into the recruiter's office and didn't realize at the time that the Marine Corps is a department of the Navy. It's a men's department, but it's still a department of the Navy. And I went in, and the Navy recruiter wasn't at his desk, but the Marine was. So I decided I'd leave and come back when the Navy guy came back. And the Marine said, just a second. what do you want here? And I said, well, I'm planning on enlisting in the Navy, and he's not here, so I'm going to leave. He said, hey, come here, sit down. Let's talk for a little while. He's just gone to lunch. He'll be back 15, 20 minutes. Let's talk. Let's have a talk. So I sat down and talked. About 15, 20 minutes later, I left the recruiting station. The Navy guy hadn't come back. And the Marine had talked me into enlisting in the Marine Corps, which I didn't want, to go to school, which I didn't want, on airplanes, which I didn't want. So in 15 minutes, I got everything that I did not want. And being a young 18-year-old not knowing any better, I thought, well, at least I've gone into the Marine Corps on an aviation guarantee, which, in my mind, told me that no matter what, I wasn't going to be a grunt out in the field. I was going to be working on airplanes or around airplanes or having something to do with airplanes, and that was fine with me. Well, I went through boot camp, graduated, got my globe eagle and anchor, went on to infantry training, because in Marine Corps, every person is a rifleman, and you're trained as a rifleman no matter what your specialty is. And so I went through my infantry training, went on to NAS Memphis for my tech school, and when we got assigned to our first tech school, the instructor said, okay, how many of you guys are here on aviation guarantee? That's me. I'm not going to be a grunt. He said, do you realize what aviation guarantee means? We said, yeah, we're going to be in the aviation. He goes, no. What it means is the Marine Corps has guaranteed to send you to an aviation school. It's on you to pass that school. And if you don't pass that school, guess what? You're a grunt. Well, that was a real motivating factor. Like I said, in high school, my grades sucked. Excuse the language. But I thought, I better crack down, better buckle down, because I don't want to be a grunt. Well, I buckled down, and I graduated 5th in my class of 250 people out of my tech school. Picked up a rank and became E3 Lance Corporal, and because I was 5th in the class, aside from getting the rank, I was allowed to choose my duty station. So I chose Marine Corps Air Station El Toro. Used to be in Santa Ana, California, and now they're going to make it a park or something, I'm not sure. Was assigned to my first squadron. When I walked into the squadron office, it was July 1967. First thing we were told was the squadron was deploying to Vietnam in August of 1967. And that was the first time I really started seriously thinking about Vietnam. Prior to that, probably the only thing I remembered about Vietnam was somewhere in 1963, a bunch of Buddhist monks, who didn't like what was going on with the war, decided to set themselves on fire in Saigon, and that's all I knew about Vietnam. But I knew that it was a war zone, and I knew that there was a possibility of getting killed even if I was in a relatively safe environment. The thing a lot of people don't understand is, for every one of these guys that were out in the field, the grunts that were pounding the pavement, there was like 5 to 7 people in the rear that had to support them. When they got in trouble, they called for air support. The helicopters went in to either medevac them or provide them immediate response support, or they called for Phantoms jets to come in and drop napalm and heavy bombs on the enemy. So there were support people in Vietnam who experienced a lot of the war in a lot of different ways. I was assigned to Da Nang Air Base, which was in the northern I Corps, what we used to call I Corps of Vietnam. And I landed there on August 30th, 1968. I stepped off the airplane, and when I first got off the airplane, I thought, well, the place isn't too bad. We're just another duty station. And we immediately had to secure our aircraft, get them ready for the next day's flight before we were allowed to go back and get our stuff together. So we secured our aircraft, and about 6:30, 7 o'clock at night, we finally were secured to go back and set up our living area. So we lived about 2 miles from the airbase. And we went back and were putting our living area together, and all of a sudden we heard these sirens going off and rockets coming in. And it was kind of like the Vietnamese welcoming committee. and they dropped about 8 or 10 rockets on the airbase. And I was never so glad to be about 2 or 3 miles from the airbase at the time because they were trying to get the aircraft. Well, at that point, I got this real strange feeling, and didn't take me long to figure out that feeling was fear. And that fear stayed with me for the next 13 months that I was in Vietnam. Because no matter where you were or what you did, you always had that chance of either being hit by a rocket, hit by a mortar, hit by ground attack. It didn't matter. Well, we were working our flight ops, and I was trained as a jet engine mechanic, and I was assigned as a plane captain on F-4s. That's my airplane that I was responsible for while we were there. And as plane captain, there's your responsibility is to get the aircraft ready on a regular basis, daily. And but there are other jobs that we have to do to prepare the aircraft. And so each day, different individuals were chosen to take care of these special projects. And somebody else took care of your aircraft for that day. Well, this one day I was assigned as a hot refuel crew. And what we did was, our purpose, our mission there, was to get the aircraft ready to support these guys out in the field as quickly as possible. Well, a normal turnaround on an F-4 from the time it lands to the time it's ready to fly is an hour and a half. Well, that was totally unacceptable because these guys couldn't be waiting for an hour and a half for air support. So we devised a system whereby we could turn the aircraft around quicker. And one of the parts of that system was what we called hot refueling. And the aircraft would come back from a mission, pull into the fuel pits, we'd check it real quick to make sure there weren't any major battle damage or fuel leakage, and hook them up to the fuel nozzle while they were still running, fill them with fuel, send them back to the flight line. And by doing that and a few other things, we could turn these aircraft around in a half an hour. So we shaved an hour off of the process so we could support the guys out in the field. Well, this day I was assigned hot refueling, and I was sitting in the refueling pits and saw one of our aircraft coming into the pattern. And as he came into the pattern, I saw this puff of white smoke go out the back of the airplane. Being that highly trained jet engine mechanic that I was, I realized that he had lost an engine. But the Phantom's got 2 engines, and he can fly just as well on one, so I wouldn't worry about it. Well, as he turned onto final approach, about 4 miles off the end of the runway, I saw a second puff of white smoke. And as soon as I saw that puff of white smoke, I saw 2 canopies go off that aircraft, 2 seats come out, 2 parachutes, and saw the airplane hit the water. Well, I immediately went into our line shack to tell the officer of the day that we had lost an aircraft. And when I got in there, he said, "Okay, great, grab your gear. You're going out to guard the airplane." I'm like, "I'm out, Lieutenant. Jet engine mechanic, Marine Corps spent millions of dollars to train me. I don't do guard." He goes, "No, rifleman, guard airplane." So they put myself and 5 other guys into a truck, sent us out towards a crash site. As we were going out there, we were listening to the radio. And on the radio came a person who we knew as Hanoi Hannah. She was the same as Tokyo Rose during World War II, but she used to put out propaganda to demoralize the troops. Well, she came on the radio, and she not only told us that our squadron had lost an airplane, she told us the number of the airplane, the pilot's name, the backseater's name. And it blew me away, because I realized at that point that they knew far more about us than we knew about them. When we got to the crash site, and again, our first mission on that assignment was to prevent any of the villagers, any of the DC from collecting any of the gear or any of the equipment off the aircraft. Well, as we jumped off the truck heading towards the beach, we saw a crowd of Vietnamese crowd around the beach, and so we immediately locked and loaded, headed towards that crowd of people, because we wanted to make sure they weren't getting any gear. And as we approached the crowd of people, they kind of parted to let us through. And when we got to see what they were looking at, they were looking at some of the gear from the aircraft, and it was the radar package. What had happened was, when the aircraft hit the water, the radar package broke loose, shot through the nose of the airplane, skimmed across the water, came up on the beach, hit a 12 and a 14-year-old girls, threw them through a barbed wire fence and into the side of a boat. And our first assignment was to pick those bodies up and return them to their families. At that point, I realized that war was nothing like I thought it was supposed to be. I'd grown up on World War II movies where you never saw anybody get killed, you never saw any blood, you never saw any guts, and women and children weren't part of the mix. Well, that day, my life changed permanently. And for the next 12 days, we sat on that beach, guarding that airplane, making sure nobody got any of the parts off of that airplane. Unfortunately for us, we could only see about 4 feet of the tail section of the airplane because it went into the water. And so we had no idea whether they were getting anything off the airplane or not. But our assignment was to guard the airplane, so we guarded the airplane for 12 days. On the 12th day, they brought a floating wrecker out, picked up the remains of the aircraft, policed up all of the parts that we could find there, took it back to the air base, put it in a hangar, started to piece it back together to make sure we got everything that was on the airplane. And when we got it pieced back together, we pretty much had every piece of that airplane, except for the missiles and the rockets that were on the airplane we were supposedly guarding. To this day, I don't know how they got it, when they got it, but they got it. Not long after that, I was assigned to the security detail for the air base. And another part of your military experience is that you have special duties that you have to do just because. And one of those is security. So I was assigned to the security detail. And I was assigned primarily as a day guard person. And what we did was, for the most part, sat in the duty hut and listened to the radio, listened for these guys to radio for support, and then we were to ensure that they got whatever support they got. But in that capacity, I also worked as a brig chaser, which was basically guarding prisoners and taking them from the brig to their court-martial and then taking them back. And they gave you a little incentive on that project too. They told you if your prisoner escaped, you were going to serve his time, so you made sure your prisoner didn't escape. I was also assigned as a security for USO shows, and we'd go out to the LZs and fire bases that were around the LZ as a landing that were around Da Nang, and we'd pick up USO shows and bring them back into Da Nang, and they put on their performance, and then we'd take them back to their hotels in Da Nang. And in fact, I was assigned to guard the Bob Hope show that was coming to Da Nang in 1968, but prior to that happening, my dad passed away, and I came back on emergency leave, so I wasn't there. My main responsibility on the security detail was to be, I was a team member for a MedCap patrol. MedCap patrol was a medical assistance civil action patrol. And basically what we did was we took doctors and nurses out to the villages around town, around the air base, and did whatever the villagers needed as far as inoculations and medical assistance that we could give. I was a rifleman on a fire team, and there were 5 of us that would go out with the nurses, doctors and nurses, to provide security for them. The interesting thing about being on a MedCap team was it wasn't uncommon for us to go out on a patrol, on a mission, go to a village, maybe inoculate the village kid with smallpox or whatever shots that they needed, and then leave. And a couple weeks later, maybe a month, we'd go back to check how things were going at the village, and we'd go back into the village and we'd find all of the kids that we had inoculated with the shots had their arms cut off because the VC didn't want them to be getting assistance from us. On one occasion, we were told that all of the commanding officers and executive officers from all of the all of the squadrons on the air base wanted to go out to one of the villages on a MedCap patrol with us. And I'm not sure why. Maybe it was for a photo opportunity or whatever, but they were going to come out. So instead of taking a 5-man team and going out with the team at 9 o'clock in the morning, like we normally did, we had to pull together a 60-man platoon, go out at 4:30 in the morning to secure the village so that the these officers wouldn't get killed from snipers in the village. Well, we went out about 4:30. We loaded on the trucks, headed out to the village. We got out the village, jumped off the truck, and the platoon sergeant said, "Okay, Palermo, you got point." Now, point is the lead guy. During the Iraq War, you heard it referred to as the tip of the spear. It's the guy that's out in front, responsible for engaging the enemy before they see you, or preventing booby traps. He's basically responsible for the entire group. The only other time I had been point in my military career was during infantry training. And during infantry training, I was a team leader for a fire team. And we were out on a maneuver, and I missed a tripwire on booby trap. And I detonated the booby trap, and I killed myself and my fire team. Well, that was my only other experience as a point man. And now I'm responsible for 60 people. And if the booby trap goes off, you don't just get up and dust yourself off and go home. You're dead. And so that was weighing real heavy on me. And I was petrified of the fact that I might kill these guys. Not really worried about getting myself killed, more about my buddies getting killed. Fortunately, we hooked up with a scout dog team. And the scout dog actually walked point, and I basically walked shotgun for him, protecting his back, his handler's back. And what we did was we went up to the north end of the village, hooked up with the 3rd Marine Division, a unit of the 3rd Marine Division that was on the north end of the village, had that area secured. And then we swept back through the village, intending to put up a perimeter around the village so that it was secure. Well, as we went into the village, our responsibility was to make sure that there weren't any snipers or any weapons or anything in there. Well, our rules of engagement, you heard of that movie, what you're supposed to do when you're in a combat situation. Our rules of engagement told us that if we went into the village and the villager said that there were no VC in the village, we could not do anything other than walk through the village. If we saw a trap door where we knew somebody would probably be hiding, we couldn't lift it up and investigate because the villagers had told us there weren't any VC in the village. Most villagers, when you went into a village, would tell you that there's no VC in the village because they knew if they told us that there was VC in the village, we would either wipe out their village or we would try and get those VC. And if we did, even if we did get those VC that were in the village, when we left, the VC would come back in and kill villagers. So they would tell you no VC in the village. So we swept through the village, set up our perimeter around the village. About 9 o'clock, the trucks came in from the air base to provide assistance for the villagers and provide the officers a photo op. And as it was coming, we noticed there was only one truck, and that was too small for the number of officers they had. Well, we found out that, again, for reasons unknown to us, they decided they didn't want to come out to this village. So the only people that were on the trucks were the medical team. The medical team pulled in the village, this secure village that we had secured moments before, and they were inside the village for about 5 minutes and were opened up on by snipers from within the village. Fortunately, there were only 2 wounded. Nobody got killed, except for the sniper. But the fact that we virtually had our hands tied, that we could not do the job that we were trained to do, weighed heavy on a lot of us during the time that we were over there. In November of 1968, on a MedCap patrol, we were just securing from that patrol, waiting for the trucks to come pick us up, and we saw a Red Cross Jeep coming down the road. Didn't think too much of it until it pulled into the village area that we were at. And when they got up there, they said, "Is Lance Corporal Palermo here?" "Now, that's me. What do you need?" He said, "Well, we can't tell you, but we got to take you back to the air base." Well, my dad had had heart problems for a long time prior to my going to Vietnam, and I kind of figured that was probably what it was. I got back to the Red Cross station, and they told me that my dad had passed away, and that I was going home on emergency leave. So I went back to my hut, went into my sea bag, which is sitting over there, pulled out my Class A uniform, threw it in a AWOL bag, a little carry-on bag, headed for the airport to get the airplane back to the States. Well, it flew me from Da Nang to Okinawa. And when I got to Okinawa, they told me to put on my Class A uniform because I couldn't travel back to the States in my jungle fatigues. And this is similar to what we wore in Vietnam. None of the ribbons or medals on it, but that's what we wore. And I had that on, mud up to my knees, and went into the restroom to put my Class A's on and pulled them out of the bag. And they'd been stuffed in the bottom of the sea bag for 4 months in hot, humid weather, and they were a shambles. And one of the many things that Marines are proud of is their uniform, and there was no way I was going to wear that uniform looking the way it did. Well, one of the guys that was in the head with me said, if you're on emergency leave, they can't stop you. You can go back. So I went to the airplane, boarded it, headed on a flight back to the States, was scheduled to land in Travis Air Force Base outside of San Francisco. We got about half an hour out from Travis, and they said that Travis was fogged in, and we were going to land at San Francisco International Airport. So here I am, November 1968, jungle fatigues, mud from the Vietnam all over me, and I'm in downtown, or the middle of San Francisco Airport. Not a good place to be. We weren't well accepted. We weren't well received. Well, I went through the whole process of burying my father. Worked with a chaplain to try and get a humanitarian transfer back to the States, since my mom was living in California by herself, and my sister was living in Georgia with her husband, who was in the hospital having been wounded in Vietnam. And I worked with a chaplain, and the chaplain said, no problem, you can get a transfer back to the States. So I put in the paperwork, and a couple of days later, the Marine Corps came back and said, no, we don't see any reason to keep you here in the States, you're going back to Vietnam. So I went back to the chaplain and said, why'd you put me through this? Why'd you hassle me with this? And he said, well, you should have gotten the humanitarian transfer. I said, well, I didn't. He said, well, don't worry about it. Call your congressman. He will keep you from going back to Vietnam. So I called my congressman's office. He was in South America or someplace. But his office said, don't worry about it. You're not going anywhere until the congressman figures out what's going on here. And you're not going back to Vietnam. I said, okay, great. So I went home and I told my mom. But the Marine Corps doesn't like to let you just kind of sit around and do nothing. And so I was assigned to a duty at the air base at El Toro while I was waiting for this to transpire. And so the next day I went back in, and at that time we were told to travel in civilian clothes because of the war protesters. They didn't want us to be exposed to any undue influence. And so I went to work in my civilian clothes, reported into my duty section, and the sergeant said, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be up at the headquarters. I said, well, nobody told me. He said, well, get up there. So I went up to the headquarters building, went in to see the first sergeant, and when I walked in, he said, what are you doing in civilian clothes? And I said, you told me not to wear military uniform when I'm coming back and forth. He said, well, yeah, that's when you're traveling back and forth to base, but when you're traveling, you're supposed to be in your Class A's. And I go, I'm not traveling anywhere. And he said, oh, yes, you are. Here's your orders. You're going back to Vietnam. And I said, I called my congressman, and my congressman said I wasn't going anywhere. And the first sergeant said, I don't care what your congressman said. Here's your orders. You're to be at Terminal Island, San Francisco at 3 o'clock this afternoon. So I had to go home, tell my mom that I was going back to Vietnam, get my gear, get back to the base, and get on an airplane heading towards Treasure Island. While I was on the airplane, we're flying along, and we had to land at Alameda Naval Air Station in the San Francisco area to get to Treasure Island. And as we're flying along, one of the crew members said, there's Alameda down there. I thought, oh, cool, we'll be landing in a few minutes. I watched as Alameda proceeded to go past the window, and I called the crewman back and I said, how come we're not landing? He said, well, we're not scheduled to land here. We're going to Washington, Seattle, Washington, spending the night and then coming back tomorrow morning. I went, I got orders to be there at 3 o'clock this afternoon. And the Marine Corps doesn't like you not to follow orders. And he goes, well, that's weird. Why'd they put you on this airplane? I went, I have no idea. Well, he went up and talked to the colonel that was flying the airplane, and the colonel talked to somebody down on the ground. Finally, he came back and he said, it's all taken care of. We've explained the mix-up. You're to report there tomorrow morning, when we get back from Seattle. So we went up to Seattle, spent the night, headed back, landed at Alameda Naval Air Station. I walked off the airplane and was greeted by two shore patrol. I was arrested for being AWOL for my orders, not having reported there at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Well, my attitude really started to change at that point because I figured, what are they going to do to me? Send me to Vietnam? I'm on my way. Processed through that, went back to Vietnam, spent the remainder of my 13 months in Vietnam. Our squadron moved from Da Nang Air Base in January of 1969, moved to Chu Lai, which was about 35 miles south along the coast, and we did the remainder of our 13 months. So in Vietnam, you have what they call DROS, and that's the date of expected rotation from overseas service. That means when you're coming home. And for the Army, Navy, Air Force, they had a 12-month DROS. For the Marine Corps, we had 13 months. I'm not sure, maybe we were dumber, it took us longer to learn that you could get killed in Vietnam, but for whatever reason, we had a longer time than we spent in Vietnam. Well, my DROS date was September of 1969. That's when I'm heading home. That's what I was looking for. Along about the 1st of September, we were notified, just as he built up the war, started going, we were the first squadron that President Nixon pulled out of Vietnam when he was starting to de-escalate the war. So instead of coming home in September, they extended us because we had the experience of transporting the squadron, from one place to another, and so we were extended. And on about September 20th of 1969, we took our squadron from Chu Lai, South Vietnam, to Iwakuni, Japan. About a month later, we finally came back to the States. When I came back to the States, I had orders to be released from active duty. That was great. Originally had a 4-year active duty enlistment, and this was like a 13-month cut for me. I was ready to quit. We got back, and as we disembarked from the aircraft, they had a loudspeaker going, and they were directing each of the people to different doors that they were supposed to go through to process out. And they started calling, from A to Z, or A to S, go through this door, from S to Z, go through that door. And then they said, the following MOSs, and an MOS is your military occupation specialty, what you do, your job. I was a 6318 jet engine mechanic. They said the following MOSs report to this other door. And they started reading off the MOSs. And I'm sure it was the first one on the list, 6318. Well, I was with 5 other friends, all through 6318, all on release orders. And I said, this isn't going to be good news. We walked through the door and they said, Marine Corps has decided that 6318 is a critical MOS. We need you too much, so you're not getting out. You're going to have to do the rest of your enlistment. Added to my attitude problems. Well, by this time, myself and the 5 guys that are with were E5s, sergeants, positions of responsibility. We were assigned to a training squadron, stationed at El Toro, put into positions of authority. I was a shop chief for the engine shop. My other friends were shop chiefs for other areas. And our responsibility was to get guys not much older than you ready to go get killed in Vietnam. And we had a real hard time with that. We had a real attitude problem. Unfortunately, our attitude problem reflected in the way we did things and the way we acted. And it was noticed by the higher echelon officers in this squadron. And so the 5 of us were invited to go to our executive officer for a little thing we call the captain's mass, or which is basically one step below a court martial. And we went in and we were told by the executive officer that we were not displaying traits that were becoming E5s in the United States Marine Corps, and that disciplinary action would have to be taken. And so, fortunately for us, the executive officer was a Vietnam veteran, and he knew what our attitude problems were. He knew why we were acting the way we were. So he cut us some slack, and he said, okay, normally you would be busted to E1s and relieved of all duty and responsibility, but because I know what's going on, if you guys give me your solemn word that you will not let this attitude influence the people you're training, I won't bust you right now, but if you come before me again, you're getting break time and getting busted. So we said, okay, we solemnly swear that we won't adversely influence our troops. And we left, and we got outside, and most of us looked at each other and said, you know, I'm getting out of the Marine Corps. I'll either get out as an E5 or I'll get out as an E1, but I'm getting out. So our attitudes didn't change. But fortunately, we were never brought up for charges again. 1970, I was discharged from the Marine Corps. 1970, I was discharged from active duty. 1972, I was discharged from the Marine Corps. My 6-year commitment having been fulfilled, and went on to live what I considered a relatively productive life. Vietnam was behind me. It was something that I had experienced. I didn't like it, but I didn't think about it, and I didn't want to talk about it. And besides, most of the people that I came in contact with either didn't want to talk about it, or, in my opinion, didn't deserve to be talked to about it because they hadn't experienced it. They didn't know what we went through. They didn't know the fear and the horror that we saw out there. So I wasn't going to tell them about it. About 1991, November, right around Thanksgiving, I was coming home from work, and I went past the federal building in Redondo Beach, California. And I saw this black structure up on the lawn at the federal building. And I said, what in the world is that? And one of the people who were on the bus said, it's the half-scale Vietnam War Memorial. Maybe I better go check this out and see what's going on. So the next day, I drove into work because I had been in a carpool. And I drove into work. And at lunchtime, I went over to the wall. And as I approached the wall, all of these old feelings started to emerge. And the way they had the wall set up there, they had a row of lights about 3 feet away from the wall that they used to illuminate it at night. And as long as I stayed on this side of those lights, I was fine. But when I crossed that little barrier, I felt like I was being sucked into that wall. It felt like I fit more with the guys whose names were on that wall than I did with the people I had been living with for the last 25 years. When I came back from Vietnam, when I got out, I felt like I did not belong. I did not fit. I had a guy who was my best buddy in high school, my best man at my wedding. He and I hung together all the time. I hadn't seen him for 20 years. I went to his 45th birthday, and I sat down and I watched him, and he was the exact same person that I knew in high school. I'm sure he was a little older, a little fatter, but he was the exact same person. He did not act or talk any different. And I looked at myself and I said, I'm not the guy that graduated with him in 1966. Vietnam changed me. As a result of going to the wall and a number of other experiences, I realized that I needed to deal with my Vietnam experience. I needed to talk about it. I needed to talk with people who understood what I was feeling, what I was experiencing. Got hooked up with a group that's known as Point Man International, and it's basically a support group for veterans. And it's veterans of all war, because the struggles I have, the things that I can't forget, have very little to do with the fact that I was in Vietnam. They have a whole lot to do with the fact that I was in the war. And war changes you. These guys, you'll hear a lot that Vietnam, the problem with Vietnam veterans is we didn't get a parade when we got back. These guys, when they come back from Iraq, They'll get parades, they'll get all of the hoopla. But I guarantee you, 6 months down the road, after all the hoopla has died down, those guys are going to struggle with the same thing that we struggle with. The fact that they had to do things, they saw things that people aren't normally supposed to see or do. Through my involvement with Point Man, I was able to deal with those demons of Vietnam. They don't bother me as much. They're still there. I don't have the recurring nightmares and flashbacks that I used to have. Those 2 little girls that I told you about early on, they were part of my dreams for a long time. They're not. In actuality, I don't remember the last time I dreamt, so I don't know if they are still part of that. I don't sleep a lot at night. I'm on medication to help me sleep. It doesn't help me sleep. It's just all part of that anxiety that's in there that is the way I deal with Vietnam. I'm fortunate now because I'm with Point Man. I'm a outpost leader. We have an outpost here that meets on Wednesday nights. Get together with guys, talk about our war experience, try and relate that to why we act the way we do. Medically, they're finding out now that the war, traumatic experiences, alters your mind's chemistry so that there's no way you can go back because it's changed. I don't encourage people to go into the military, but I don't discourage them either. I think the military is one of the greatest ways a young person can get some education, can grow up. But the problem with the military is, as the coach said, you're trained to kill, and you're expected to do that when you get into a conflict situation. It's a real tough way to go. And if you don't have to go into combat, it's great. But if you have to, it's going to change your life like nothing else could possibly do. Part of my therapy for dealing with Vietnam is doing what I'm doing right now, talking to people about what I experienced in Vietnam, what I saw, what I felt, what type of an effect it had on my life. And I'm 40 years from when I left Vietnam, and I can be back there right now because it's part of me, so much a part of me. A friend will mention something, and it won't be just a memory, it'll be a vivid fact that I can be part of. I worked with veterans, trying to help them deal with those issues. One of the big problems that we as Vietnam veterans had was the fact that we didn't talk about our work. We came back basically in disgrace, basically didn't want to talk about it, or others didn't want us to talk about it. And so we buried it. And the problem with trauma is you can only bury it so long, and sooner or later it's going to come to the surface. But I got to a point where in 1998, I went back to Vietnam and was able to exercise the rest of those demons that were there. I've talked way too long. Any questions, feel free.
At this time, you guys are encouraged to ask questions. You can direct questions to one or the other or both. So I'm just going to open the floor to you.
What's the ace of spades?
It's known as the death card. The first air cav, after their experience, which you probably saw in We Were Soldiers, realized that our enemy wasn't playing by the same rules, and when they would kill our guys, they would not just kill them, but they would mutilate them and do some pretty awful things to their bodies. And so the first air cav decided that when they went back and retaliated for those hits, that they would let the enemy know that it was them that did it. And so they initiated the ace of spades as the death card, and they would leave the body of the enemy so they couldn't kill. everybody ask questions at once.
Do either of you regret going?
I didn't hear the question.
Do either of you regret going?
I still didn't understand.
Do either of you regret
Regret
going?
going.
No, I never have, because prior to being selected to go to combat in Southeast Asia, I knew fully from the time that I left the United States where I was going and why I was going. And that particular situation just didn't come up to my mindset because I was, like I said, I was trained. And you didn't go through the type of training that some of us went through to go back home and watch TV. So it didn't take us by surprise. I knew where I was going. I knew what I had to do when I got there, and I knew there was a 97% chance that I would not come back.
What were you guys told when you were going while you're fighting?
What happened?
What were you told about what you were fighting for when you went over?
Well, as I told you, as I said, I was on a team that was handpicked by the president, and we went through specialized training. And when we were selected, we were told what we were selected for, where we go to get training, and what the training would give us. And then once you complete training, this is what you're going to be doing. And that's just the way we understood it. And like I said, I would go back if I had to go do it again. I'd go back. But right now, I'm convinced that I will not have to go back through something like that. Even like the Iraqi war that we're experiencing right now is basically not the same that we had in Southeast Asia, because the Iraqi war is a wide open land war, and Vietnam was a jungle war. You never knew. You could be 15 feet from your enemy and never knew it.
The interesting thing about Vietnam was, because of the length of the war, you have a whole gamut through which people experienced the war. If you talk to somebody who went in 1963, 1964, when we had advisors there and there was very little to no comment being accomplished by U.S. troops, they believed that they were stopping the communist aggression, and they knew what their purpose was for being there. By the time you get to 1970, 72, 73 time frame, the military guys had been pretty much disillusioned. I mean, if somebody came to me to tell me why I was going to Vietnam, if it came from the party line, from the officers, from the government, it was that we were still stopping communist aggression. If it came from somebody who'd been over there, it was that we were just cannon fodder. We were being sent over there because somebody didn't want to stop this war. Just the whole attitude of not only the people in the United States, but of the warriors who went there changed over the years, because once you go into combat and you know what you're trained to do, and then you're restricted from doing that, the whole system breaks down, because you can't process it mentally as to why am I here? What am I doing? What am I going to accomplish? And I don't think you would find a veteran who would say that they wouldn't do it again if they had the opportunity. But that has a lot to do with the mindset of the guys that went over there. Like I said, we were raised from most of our fathers were World War II veterans. We were raised under World War II ethics, and we believed that our country, right or wrong, and we're going to go do what we need to do. So that's a hard question to answer, because of the variety of things that went on in Vietnam and the length of time that you're talking about.
Didn't I see someone with a hand up earlier? Melissa?
Do you think that Vietnam Vietnam was a character building experience for you?
Well, character, that's a pretty good one. I had already served, see, I entered the military in 1954 into the Air Force. And I went to training and became a military policeman. So I knew all the gadgets, in and out. I was an expert on the Uniform Code of Military Justice. I knew nothing or very little about the U.S. Constitution when I went into the military. But after I got into the military, I studied three most important books that I felt was most important: the Constitution, the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and the Bible. And next to those three books, I went to the library and I checked out, and I became an unauthorized owner of a collegiate dictionary. And I had to elevate myself from the philosophies that I had been sort of, engaged with over my younger years. And I came up in a pretty diverse society. I was born in 1933, and we had the race relations, well, not race relations, we had segregation. And so I had white buddies while I was in high school that we could not go to school together. In fact, we hardly ever visited each other's homes. But yet, every time a couple of my buddies, every time their dad would get a new car, they'd come down and sneak me for a ride. So things like that. I had a great deal of experiences when it comes to building character, and I always wanted to be successful. I wanted to try to be something that maybe somebody before me was not. And I could have went down the wrong road because I was recruited by the Black Panthers in the early 60s. And I refused. I refused to get involved because I felt it was not a United States characteristic way for a youngster to have to live a life. So I regrouped. And to add to my character building, I was a terrible student. Just like George said, he was a terrible student in high school. Most of us who you see now that's either successful or have survived a great deal of unsuccessful situations is because we were once at a time very unsuccessful or very rebellious, So that's just the way it was, and through all of my life experiences, they sort of capitalized and made me what I was, and the government saw me in order to prepare me and send me into the combat service. And I had a school teacher that, while everybody else sort of pushed me aside, this one school teacher I'll never forget, and I honor her today, even in her death. She made me, she brought out the best of me. She got me to understand things that even my own parents couldn't.
For myself, I'd say Vietnam was a character-altering experience. I know that there are some positive things, or a lot of positive things that I do today as a result of my experience in Vietnam, but there's also a lot of negative things. I went to Vietnam. I was a young, fun-loving, optimistic boy. I came back and I was a harsh, pessimistic man who just didn't want to take anything from anybody. And so it altered my character, and God will be the judge whether it was building or destructive.
What were some of the things you went through before your training?
I was in Michigan when I received special orders from the president of the report to Kansas. We had to go to an abandoned, deserted military base, which was Ridley. And there we carried on all of our necessary training methods. We received combat training, which consisted on how to survive, like I said earlier, in the jungle. I could go out in the jungles alone and survive. I didn't need any help because of the things that we had been taught. I received stead training while I was there, which is the prisoner of war training. You know what they expect after you're captured, et cetera, how you should be treated by the captures and all those things. John McCain and I were in Vietnam at the same time, except he was a pilot.